What if the life you are living right now is not actually yours? What if every choice you have made, every path you have taken, every dream you have quietly buried was shaped not by what you truly wanted, but by what you feared others would think of you? What if the version of yourself that shows up every single day, the one that says yes when it means no, that shrinks in rooms where it should expand, that plays it safe when it is dying to take risks? What if that version is not the real you at all, but a performance? A costume you put on so long ago that you forgot you were wearing it. This audiobook is about taking it off. Not gently, not politely, but completely. Because here is the truth that no one around you will ever say out loud. Most people will live and die as hostages to the opinions of others. They will choose careers their parents approved of and spend decades quietly resenting it. They will stay in relationships that look good from the outside while they feel completely hollow on the inside. They will post the version of themselves that gets likes and hide the version that gets real. They will nod when they disagree, laugh when they are hurting, and smile when they are completely falling apart, all to avoid one thing: judgment. But here is the question no one ever stops to ask you. What is all of that costing you? Not in some vague, abstract sense. In real, concrete, devastating terms. What has the fear of what people think already taken from you? How many chances did you not take? How many things did you not say? How many mornings did you wake up and put on a mask before you even got out of bed? How many versions of yourself have you silenced, buried, or abandoned because you were afraid of what someone else would think? This audiobook will answer those questions. And then it will give you something far more powerful than any approval you have ever chased. It will give you yourself back. By the time you finish listening to this, the way you see other people's opinions will be permanently changed. The invisible weight that has been pressing down on your chest every time you walk into a room will begin to lift. The voice in your head that second guesses every decision, every word, every move you make, that voice will lose its power, and you will finally understand what it actually means to live. Not for the crowd, not for the validation, not for the applause, but for you. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Invisible Prison. Why you were programmed to seek approval. Right now, at this very moment, there is a prison that most people live inside of their entire lives and never once realize they are trapped. There are no bars. There are no walls. There is no guard watching over you. The door is not even locked. And yet billions of people on this planet wake up every morning, walk inside that prison, and spend the rest of their day performing for an audience that is barely even watching. That prison is the need for other people's approval. And the most insidious thing about it is this: you were put there before you ever had a say in the matter. You did not choose this prison. You did not walk in voluntarily. You were placed inside of it as a child, by a world that rewarded you for compliance and punished you for authenticity. And then, over the years, the walls became so familiar that you stopped noticing them. You started calling them normal. You started calling them responsible. You started calling them realistic. And the prison stopped feeling like a prison at all. It started feeling like just the way life is. But it is not the way life is. It is a program. And like any program, once you understand how it was installed, you can uninstall it. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to before you ever cared what anyone thought. When you were a small child, before the world got to you, you were completely and utterly free. You said exactly what was on your mind. You laughed too loudly in quiet places. You danced in grocery stores without a single thought about who was watching. You wore ridiculous outfits because they made you happy. You asked embarrassing questions. You cried when you were sad, screamed when you were angry, and ran toward what excited you without calculating how it looked. You were, in the truest sense of the word, yourself. And then something started to happen. You began to notice reactions. You began to notice that certain things you did made the people around you smile, and other things made them frown, pull away, or raise their voice. You began to learn, through countless tiny moments of feedback, that your behavior had consequences, that who you were, the raw, unfiltered, authentic version of you, was not always welcome, that sometimes it needed to be adjusted, softened, hidden, performed, instead of felt. This was not a conscious lesson. No one sat you down and said, "Here is how to lose yourself." It happened gradually, invisibly, the way water shapes rock, through the small humiliations of being laughed at by other kids, through the sting of a parent's disapproval, through the teacher who made an example of you in front of the class, through the moment you said something honest and the room went cold, through every single experience that taught you, at a cellular level, that being too much of yourself was dangerous. And so, you adapted. Because that is what human beings do. We adapt in order to survive. The need for social approval is not a character flaw. It is not a weakness. It is actually one of the most ancient and powerful survival mechanisms the human brain possesses. For most of human history, being rejected by your tribe was not just uncomfortable, it was lethal. If your group cast you out, you died. There was no surviving alone on the savannah. There was no getting through the winter without your community. Belonging was survival. Approval was oxygen. Your brain knows this. Even today, even in a world where social rejection will not literally kill you, your brain responds to disapproval the same way it responds to physical danger. The same neural circuits light up. The same stress hormones flood your system. The same primal alarm goes off, which is why being criticized, rejected, or judged does not just feel bad. It feels threatening. It feels like danger. Because for hundreds of thousands of years, it was. But here is what your brain has not caught up to yet. You are not on the savannah anymore. The stakes have changed completely. The tribe that once held the power of life and death over you is now just a collection of people with their own insecurities, their own blind spots, their own unresolved fears and half-formed opinions. Their judgment of you is not a verdict. It is not a truth. It is not a death sentence. It is just noise. It is just one very limited perspective from inside a very limited experience of life. And yet most people treat it like gospel. Most people rearrange their entire lives around what that noise might say. They choose safe careers because risky ones invite criticism. They dress in ways that disappear into the crowd because standing out invites scrutiny. They keep their dreams private because sharing them invites doubt. They swallow their opinions in conversations because expressing them invites conflict. They live their entire lives in a crouch, trying to take up as little space as possible, all to avoid the thing their ancient brain has been telling them to fear since the moment they were born. But what they do not realize, what you are about to realize, is that the approval they are chasing is not even real. It is not a fixed thing out there in the world that you can capture and hold and keep. It is a moving target. It changes. It shifts. It contradicts itself constantly. The same person who approves of you today will disapprove of you tomorrow for a different choice. The crowd that celebrates you now will turn the moment your choices no longer align with what they want from you. Approval from other people is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it never stays full. And the people handing out that approval, they are not gods. They are not oracles of truth. They are human beings who are just as lost, just as scared, just as imprisoned in their own need for approval as you are. The person whose opinion you are terrified of, they are lying awake at night worrying about what someone else thinks of them. The person you are shrinking yourself to impress, they are shrinking themselves for someone else entirely. We are all performing for audiences who are too busy performing to even watch. This is the invisible prison. This is what you have been living inside of. And now that you can see it, really see it, for what it is, the work of getting free can begin. Because freedom does not come from suddenly not caring at all. It does not come from some dramatic act of rebellion or from becoming the kind of person who is deliberately reckless with other people's feelings. It comes from something far more powerful and far more precise. It comes from understanding exactly what you are actually afraid of, seeing it clearly without flinching, and then making the conscious, deliberate choice to no longer let that fear make your decisions for you. That is what this audiobook is about. And it starts right now. Chapter 2. The high cost of living for others. What people-pleasing is stealing from you. There is a bill that comes due for living your life in service of other people's opinions. Most people never see it itemized. They feel the cost in vague, undefinable ways, a low-grade restlessness they cannot explain, a sense that something important is missing, a quiet voice somewhere deep inside them that keeps asking, "Is this really it?" But they never trace those feelings back to their source. They never sit down and add up exactly what the life they have been performing has actually cost them. So let's do that right now. Let's look at the real, concrete, devastating price of living for the approval of others. The first thing it steals from you is time. And time is the one resource that, once spent, can never be recovered. Think about how many hours of your life you have spent worrying about what someone else thinks, not doing anything about it, not taking action, not having a conversation, not solving a problem, just worrying, just running simulations in your head of how someone might react, what they might say, what they might think of you. Studies on rumination, the psychological term for this kind of repetitive, anxious thinking, show that the average person spends enormous portions of their waking life mentally rehearsing social scenarios that will never actually happen the way they imagined. Hours every week, thousands of hours over a lifetime. Hours that could have been spent creating, building, loving, experiencing, living, stolen by a fear of a judgment that, in most cases, never even came. The second thing it steals is your voice. And losing your voice is one of the most quietly devastating things that can happen to a human being, because your voice is how you exist in the world. Your voice is how you make your mark, how you connect authentically with others, how you bring your actual self into contact with reality. When you silence your voice, when you swallow your opinions, Dilute your ideas. Soften every edge so as not to offend anyone. You do not just become quieter, you become invisible. And the tragedy of invisibility is that you can be surrounded by people and still feel completely, achingly alone, because none of those people are actually seeing you. They are seeing the performance. They are seeing the careful, curated, approval-seeking version of you. And some deep, knowing part of you is always aware of that distinction, always aware that the connection you are experiencing is not real, because the person they are connecting with is not really you. The third thing people-pleasing steals is your energy, and this is something that does not get talked about enough. Performing is exhausting. Monitoring yourself, constantly watching every word, managing every impression, calibrating every behavior to what you think the room wants from you requires an enormous expenditure of mental and emotional energy. Energy that your mind and body need for everything else. Energy that should be going toward your creativity, your work, your relationships, your health, your growth. Instead, it goes into the performance, into the maintenance of an image, into the constant grinding work of being who everyone else needs you to be. And at the end of each day, you are left depleted, hollow, and unable to clearly explain why, because you have not been doing anything that feels like hard work. You have just been existing. But the truth is, existing inauthentically is one of the most energy-intensive things a human being can do. The fourth thing it steals is your relationships. This one is particularly painful because it is so counterintuitive. You would think that people-pleasing would make you more loved, more accepted, more connected. And on the surface, it sometimes appears to. People-pleasers often have wide social circles. They are liked by many. But there is a distinction that is absolutely critical to understand. Being liked and being truly known are not the same thing. You can be liked universally and still feel utterly unknown, because being liked requires only that people enjoy the version of you that you present to them. Being truly known requires something far more vulnerable. It requires you to show them who you actually are. And when you are always managing your image, always softening your edges, always saying yes when you mean no and agreeing when you actually disagree, you are not letting anyone actually see you. You are giving them a character to like instead of a person to love. And the relationships built on that foundation are, at their core, hollow, because they are not built between two real people. They are built between one real person and one very convincing performance. The fifth thing it steals, and this may be the most important of all, is your potential, your untapped, unlived, undelivered potential. Because the dreams that get buried under the fear of what people will think are not small things. They are not trivial. They are the things that, if pursued, would have made your life feel genuinely, deeply meaningful. The business you never started because people might have thought it was too ambitious. The creative work you never shared because people might have thought it was not good enough. The relationship you never pursued because people might have thought it was not the right fit. The path you never walked because it did not look the way paths are supposed to look. Every one of those unlived possibilities is a cost, a real, permanent, irreversible cost, because time moves in only one direction. The years spent performing do not come back. The potential that goes unrealized while you wait for permission does not get stored somewhere for later. It simply disappears. Now, here is what makes all of this even harder to accept. Most of the people whose approval you have been sacrificing all of this for are not even thinking about you. This is not a cruel thing to say. It is actually one of the most liberating truths you will encounter in this entire audiobook. People are fundamentally, almost entirely preoccupied with themselves, with their own fears, their own insecurities, their own performances, their own lives. The mental energy you are spending on imagining what they think of you is energy. They are almost certainly not spending thinking about you at all. The audience you are performing for is largely not watching, and the critics you are terrified of are too busy managing their own stage fright to spend much time critiquing yours. Which means the bill you have been paying, the enormous, compounding, life-altering bill of living for other people's approval, is being paid for a service that is barely even being rendered. You are giving up your time, your voice, your energy, your relationships, and your potential to manage the opinions of people who are mostly not forming the opinions you think they are. That is the cost. That is what people-pleasing is actually stealing from you. And the moment you see it clearly, not as an abstract idea but as a real, felt, personal accounting of what has actually been taken, the urgency of change becomes impossible to ignore. Chapter 3. The root of the fear, where it all began. To stop caring what people think, you first have to understand why you care so much in the first place. Not at the level of evolutionary biology, which we have already touched on, but at the personal level, the level of your specific life, your specific experiences, your specific wounds. Because the fear of judgment is not just a species-wide phenomenon. It is a deeply personal one, and for most people, it has roots that go all the way back to some of the earliest and most formative moments of their lives. Think back, really think back, to the first time you can remember feeling ashamed, not embarrassed in a minor, passing way. Truly ashamed. That hot, sinking, wanting to disappear feeling that comes when you sense that something about you has been exposed and found wanting. When someone saw something in you, something you said, something you did, something you were, and the message you received, loud and clear, was, "That is not okay. You are not okay." For some people, that memory is loud and dramatic. A public humiliation, a parent's fury, a moment of being mocked by peers in front of others, something that left a mark so obvious they can still feel it. For others, the memory is quieter, more subtle. A parent who loved them but expressed that love conditionally, who was warm when they succeeded and withdrawn when they failed. A home where emotional expression was not safe, where showing too much feeling was seen as weakness, where the unspoken rule was that you earned love through performance. A school environment where being different was a social liability, where standing out meant standing alone, where the safest strategy was to blend in and be invisible. But here is what matters about all of those experiences, whether dramatic or quiet, obvious or subtle. They all delivered the same message, the message that who you are, in your raw and unfiltered state, carries risk. That being yourself, fully and without editing, might cost you the love, the acceptance, the belonging that you need. And so the solution your young mind arrived at was logical. It was adaptive. It was even, in many ways, brilliant. The solution was, I will monitor myself. I will manage how I am seen. I will edit the parts of myself that seem unwelcome and amplify the parts that seem to get approval. I will make myself safe by making myself palatable. And that strategy worked. At least for a while. At least in the environments where it was formed. But here is the problem with solutions that form in childhood. They do not update themselves automatically when the environment changes. They do not come with an expiration date. They get wired in, deep in the neural architecture of your brain. And they keep running long after the original threat has passed. Long after you have left the home, the school, the social group that made the strategy necessary. Long after you are fully capable of surviving disapproval. Long after the consequences of someone not approving of you are, by any objective measure, completely manageable. Psychologists have a term for this. They call them core beliefs, the deep, foundational assumptions about yourself and the world that form early in life and then act as a filter through which you process all of your subsequent experience. Core beliefs operate below the level of conscious thought. You do not sit there and deliberately think, I believe that if people see the real me, they will reject me. It just runs. It just shapes the way you see situations, the way you interpret other people's behavior, the decisions you make about how to act. It feels like reality rather than like belief. It feels like just the way things are, rather than like a story your younger self wrote to make sense of a painful experience. Some of the most common core beliefs that drive the fear of judgment sound like this. I am not enough as I am. I need other people's approval to feel okay about myself. If I show people who I really am, they will not like what they see. My worth depends on what others think of me. Disapproval means I have failed. Being different is dangerous. Standing out is not safe. Do any of those sound familiar? Not because you have consciously articulated them to yourself, but because you can feel them operating in the background of your life, in the hesitation before you share an opinion, in the way your heart rate spikes when you sense that someone is disappointed with you, in the way a single critical comment can undo days of positive feedback, in the way you find yourself working incredibly hard for the approval of people who, if you are honest, you do not even particularly respect. These beliefs are not facts. They feel like facts. They feel solid and permanent and true, the way the beliefs we absorb earliest always do. But they are not. They are conclusions. A young mind drew from a limited set of experiences in a particular environment. They are a map drawn from a very small territory, and then applied mistakenly, automatically, without examination, to a much larger world. And the reason understanding this matters so profoundly is that you cannot dismantle what you cannot see. You cannot change a program you do not know is running. Most people spend their whole lives reacting to the symptoms of these deep beliefs, the anxiety, the people-pleasing, the shrinking, the over-explaining, the need to be liked, without ever tracing those symptoms back to their source. They try to manage the outputs without touching the inputs. And so, nothing fundamentally changes, no matter how much they want it to. What changes everything is seeing the belief clearly, naming it, holding it up to the light, and asking, with real honesty, is this actually true? Not does it feel true, of course it feels true. It has been running in your brain for decades. But is it actually, objectively, verifiably true? Is it true that you are not enough as you are? Is it true that your worth depends on other people's opinions? Is it true that being yourself, fully, and without apology will lead to rejection and disaster. And when you look at the evidence not through the filter of the old belief, but as clearly and honestly as you can, you will find something extraordinary. You will find that the belief does not hold up, that you have survived disapproval, that you have been rejected and gotten through it, that the things you were most afraid people would think of, you have, in many cases, already been thought, and the consequences were not the catastrophe you feared. That the moments when you have been most genuinely yourself have not destroyed your relationships. In fact, they have often deepened them. The root of the fear is real. The experiences that created it were real. The pain that formed those early conclusions was real. None of that needs to be minimized or dismissed. But the beliefs those experiences produced are not permanent truths about reality. They are old programs that have long since outlived their usefulness. And the moment you can genuinely see that, not just intellectually, but in your bones, the process of rewriting them can begin. Chapter 4. The Opinion Illusion. Why what people think of you is none of your business. There is a famous saying, one you have probably heard before, that goes like this: what other people think of you is none of your business. And the first time most people hear that, they either dismiss it entirely or treat it as a clever piece of motivational shorthand without really sitting with what it is actually saying. So let's sit with it. Let's really unpack it, because inside that sentence is one of the most powerful and liberating ideas you will ever fully grasp. Here is the first thing you need to understand about other people's opinions of you. They are not about you. That sounds strange. Of course, someone's opinion of you is about you, right? You are the subject of the opinion. But what you are not, what you can never be, no matter how hard you try, is the author of it. Other people's opinions are formed inside their minds, filtered through their experiences, shaped by their beliefs, colored by their moods, distorted by their own unresolved fears and unhealed wounds. An opinion someone holds about you is not a direct, objective reading of who you are. It is a story they are telling themselves, constructed from a tiny, incomplete, thoroughly subjective slice of who you are, processed through everything that they are. Think about it this way. Imagine you walk into a room and say something confident and direct. One person in that room has spent their life being steamrolled by dominant personalities and hears your directness as aggression. Another person in the same room has spent their life surrounded by passive, dishonest people and hears your directness as refreshing and trustworthy. Another person is in a bad mood that has nothing to do with you and hears your confidence as arrogance. Another person is feeling insecure today and hears it as a threat. Same words, same room. 4 completely different opinions of the exact same thing. Which one is true? Which one is the correct read? None of them. All of them. The truth is that other people's opinions of you are not measurements. They are reflections. They reflect the interior life of the person forming the opinion at least as much as they reflect anything real about you. And that means that even if you could somehow perfectly control every word you said, every action you took, every impression you made, which you absolutely cannot, you would still be unable to control what people think of you. Because what people think of you is determined, in large part, by forces that have nothing to do with you at all. This is why the pursuit of universal approval is not just exhausting, It is literally impossible. You cannot be all things to all people, because all people are bringing fundamentally different things to their perception of you. The version of you that one person loves is the version that another person will find off-putting. The trait that earns you respect in one circle will earn you skepticism in another. The way of being that your family approves of may be exactly the way of being that your authentic self needs to shed. You cannot please everyone. That is not a failure on your part. It is simply the nature of human perception. It is the nature of the situation you are in. Now here is the second layer of this that makes it even more liberating. People think about you far less than you think they do. There is a well-documented cognitive bias called the spotlight effect. It refers to the human tendency to believe that other people are paying far more attention to us than they actually are. When you walk into a room with a stain on your shirt, you feel as though everyone has noticed, and everyone is thinking about it. The reality is that most people in that room are so absorbed in their own concerns, their own self-consciousness, their own mental chatter about how they are coming across, that they have barely registered your existence. When you say something awkward in a meeting, you replay it for days, certain that everyone else is replaying it too. The reality is that the other people in that meeting moved on within minutes because they were too busy thinking about what they said to spend much energy on what you said. We are each the star of our own movie. And in your movie, you are always front and center, always visible, always under the spotlight. That is why it feels like everyone is watching you. But in everyone else's movie, you are a supporting character at best. And supporting characters do not get studied. They do not get scrutinized. They appear, they have their scene, and then attention returns to the main character, which, in everyone else's movie, is them. The opinions that you are twisting yourself into knots to manage are, in the vast majority of cases, opinions that are barely being formed at all. The judgment you are terrified of is a judgment that most people do not have the time, the energy, or frankly, the interest to form. You are performing for an audience that has largely already left the theater, and even the opinions that are formed, even the people who do think about you, who do judge you, who do form assessments of your choices and your character, even those opinions are filtered through such a thick lens of subjectivity and self-interest that they simply cannot function as reliable information about who you are or how you should live. Here is the third layer. The opinions of others are temporary. People's opinions change constantly. Someone who admires you today may feel differently after you make a choice they disagree with. Someone who disapproves of you today may completely revise their view when circumstances shift. The person who thought you were making a mistake may later, quietly, come to understand that you were right. The crowd that criticized you may eventually become the crowd that celebrates you for the exact same thing. Opinions are not permanent verdicts. They are momentary impressions formed by temporary people in temporary moods. They do not deserve the weight you give them. They do not deserve to determine how you live. None of this means that feedback is worthless. It is not. There is such a thing as useful feedback, honest, specific, well-intentioned input from people who genuinely know you and genuinely want good things for you. That kind of feedback deserves to be heard. It deserves to be considered seriously. But there is a world of difference between that and the generalized ambient fear of what people might think. One is information, the other is noise. One helps you grow, The other just keeps you small. What other people think of you is, ultimately, their experience. It lives in their mind. It is processed through their filters. It reflects their world at least as much as it reflects yours. It is, in the most literal sense, none of your business, because it is not happening in your domain. It is happening in theirs. And the sooner you stop treating their experience of you as the primary measure of your worth, the sooner you will have access to the only measure that actually matters: your own. Chapter 5. The Identity Trap. Who are you without their approval? Here is a question that most people never think to ask, and that almost no one can answer cleanly when they do. Who are you, actually? Not who do you present yourself to be. Not who do the people in your life expect you to be. Not who does your job title, or your family role, or your social group define you as. Who are you? At the level beneath all of that. In the quiet place, underneath the performance. If you cannot answer that question quickly and clearly, you are not alone. In fact, most people who have spent years living for other people's approval cannot answer it at all. Because when your sense of self has been built on a foundation of external validation, when who you are has been shaped from the very beginning by who other people needed you to be, you do not necessarily have a clear, stable, internally rooted identity to fall back on. You have a collection of adaptations, a set of strategies, a patchwork of behaviors and beliefs that were assembled, piece by piece, from the feedback of other people. This is what psychologists call an externally referenced identity. And it is, in many ways, the deepest cost of people-pleasing, deeper than the time lost, deeper than the energy spent, deeper than the relationships that never got to be real. Because when your identity is built outside of you, when your sense of who you are depends on constant input from other people to remain stable, you are always, fundamentally, at the mercy of a world you cannot control. Think about what this looks like in practice. When someone criticizes you, it does not just sting, it destabilizes you, because your sense of self is genuinely shaken by it. When someone does not respond warmly, you immediately begin analyzing what you did wrong, because their coldness feels like information about your worth rather than about their mood. When you are in a new social situation, the anxiety is intense, because you do not have a stable inner reference point to fall back on. You have to wait for external cues to know how to be. When the opinions around you shift, when the crowd that celebrated you suddenly turns, or the people whose approval you valued disappear, or the roles you played that gave you identity suddenly change, you do not just feel sad or disoriented. You feel as though you have lost yourself entirely, because in a very real sense, you have. This is the identity trap. And it is one of the most powerful reasons why telling someone who is deeply enmeshed in people-pleasing to just stop caring is essentially useless advice. Because for someone whose identity is externally referenced, caring what people think is not just a habit, it is a survival mechanism. It is the mechanism by which they know who they are. And you cannot simply take that away without something to replace it. What needs to replace it is an internally referenced identity, a sense of self that is rooted in you, in your values, your beliefs, your experiences, your ways of engaging with the world, rather than in the reactions of the people around you. An identity that is stable enough to be genuinely unshaken by disapproval, because it does not depend on approval for its coherence. Not because you are indifferent to other people, you are not, And you never will be, but because your foundation is solid enough that their opinions land as input rather than as verdicts. So how do you build that? How do you develop an internally referenced identity when you have spent years or decades outsourcing your sense of self to the world around you? It starts with a process of excavation, of going inward, sometimes for the first time, and asking serious questions about what is actually there, not what you have been told is there, not what you have performed for so long that it has started to feel real, but what is genuinely, authentically, underneath all of it. What do you actually believe? Not what you say you believe in company that agrees with you. What do you believe when you are completely alone, when no one is watching, when there is no social consequence attached to your honest answer? What makes you genuinely angry, not the kind of anger that is socially acceptable to express, but the kind that moves in you when something truly contradicts your values? What moves you to genuine joy, not the kind of happiness that photographs well or impresses people, but the kind of simple, private delight that has nothing to do with anyone else being around to witness it? What would you do if you knew absolutely no one was watching and there were no social consequences of any kind? What would you wear? Where would you spend your time? What kind of work would you pursue? What kind of relationships would you seek out? What would you say out loud that you currently keep carefully hidden? The answers to those questions are not guaranteed to be comfortable. After years of adaptation, you may have lost track of some of them. Some of what you find in there may surprise you. Some of it may frighten you. Some of it may conflict with the life you are currently living in ways that feel complicated and overwhelming. But those answers are you, the real you, not the performance, not the strategy, not the carefully assembled composite of what other people wanted you to be. The genuine, irreducible, unedited core of who you actually are. And here is something remarkable about that core. It is not going anywhere. You have not destroyed it by performing over it for years. It is still in there, still intact, still waiting. People who do the work of excavation, who genuinely commit to the process of going inward and finding what is underneath all the adaptation, consistently discover that their real self is not the frightening, unacceptable thing they feared it might be. It is usually something far more interesting, more nuanced, more alive, more genuinely lovable and worthy of connection than the carefully managed performance that has been standing in for it. The other part of building an internally referenced identity is developing clarity about your values. Your values, not the values you inherited from your family without question, not the values that the culture around you has told you to have, but the ones that, when you sit with them honestly, you feel genuinely true to who you are the backbone of a stable identity. Because values do not shift with the crowd. They do not change based on who is in the room. They do not require external validation to remain real. They are yours. And when your decisions come from your values, rather than from the fear of judgment, two things happen. First, your decisions become more consistent, more coherent, more genuinely satisfying. And second, your self-respect, the kind that actually holds up under pressure, begins to grow. Self-respect is the emotional signature of a stable, internally referenced identity. It is not arrogance. It is not indifference. It is the quiet, solid knowing that you are living in alignment with who you actually are. That the life you are building is genuinely yours. That the choices you are making are expressions of your real values, rather than reactions to someone else's perceived expectations. That the person you see when you look inward is someone you can, without pretense, actually stand behind. That kind of self-respect cannot be given to you by other people. No amount of approval, no level of validation, no quantity of praise can produce it. It can only come from the inside. It can only come from the consistent, courageous choice to be who you actually are, even when that is uncomfortable, even when it invites criticism, even when it means standing alone in a room full of people who would prefer a different version of you. And when you have it, when you are genuinely living from a stable, internally rooted identity, something extraordinary happens to the way other people's opinions land. They do not disappear. You will still hear them. You will still feel them to some degree, but they will no longer have the same power, because you will no longer need them to tell you who you are. You will already know. Chapter 6. The Validation Addiction: Why Approval Feels So Good and Costs So Much. Before you can truly stop seeking approval, you need to understand something about why it is so hard to stop. Because if it was simply a matter of deciding not to care, you would have done it already. Everyone who struggles with this has told themselves, at some point, to just stop worrying about what people think. And it never works. Not sustainably. Not at the level that actually changes behavior. And the reason it never works is that the pursuit of approval is not just a habit or a mindset. It is, in the most neurochemical sense of the word, an addiction. When someone approves of you, when you receive a compliment, a like, a warm response, a nod of validation, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter that is involved in every other pleasurable experience you have ever had, the same chemical that makes food taste good, that makes a cold drink satisfying on a hot day, that makes falling in love feel electric. Dopamine is your brain's reward signal. It says, "That was good, do that again." And it does not particularly care whether what triggered it is genuinely good for you in the long run. It just knows that it felt good, and it drives you back toward the source. This is why the feeling of being approved of is so powerful. It is not weakness. It is not superficiality. It is a biological reward circuit doing exactly what it was designed to do. And like every other dopamine-driven reward circuit, it has some features that, left unmanaged, will quietly take your life in directions you did not choose. The first feature is tolerance. The same amount of validation that gave you a significant dopamine hit 6 months ago will give you a smaller hit today. The brain adapts to repeated stimuli. It adjusts its baseline, which means you need more and more approval over time to get the same feeling of okayness that less approval used to produce. The compliment that would have lit you up 2 years ago now barely registers. The amount of positive feedback you need to feel genuinely okay about yourself keeps quietly climbing. And so, you keep performing. Keep managing your image. Keep working for the approval. Not because you are getting more satisfied, but because you are getting less satisfied and chasing the lost feeling. The second feature is withdrawal. When the validation stops coming, when someone who used to praise you goes quiet, when the engagement drops, when the approval you had grown accustomed to is suddenly absent, it does not just feel neutral. It feels bad, genuinely bad, in a way that is disproportionate to the actual situation, because your brain has been calibrated to expect that input, and when the input is removed, it registers the absence as a threat. as loss, as something that needs to be urgently corrected, which is why the withdrawal of approval so often triggers frantic, anxious behavior, over-explaining, over-giving, over-performing, all in the service of getting the dopamine back. The third feature is narrowing. Over time, an addiction narrows the field of what you care about. The person who is addicted to validation finds themselves increasingly preoccupied with managing perceptions, increasingly anxious when they cannot read the room, increasingly unable to take action without external confirmation that the action is going to be well received. Other concerns, their own genuine desires, their long-term goals, their values, the parts of life that have nothing to do with being seen favorably, begin to fade into the background as more and more mental bandwidth gets consumed by the chase. Understanding this as an addiction is not meant to make you feel hopeless. Quite the opposite. Because once you understand the mechanism, you can work with it rather than against it. You can stop blaming yourself for caring what people think, since you now understand that caring was wired in by a deeply powerful biological system. You can stop trying to white-knuckle your way through it with sheer willpower, since you now understand that willpower alone is not how you rewire a dopamine circuit. And you can start doing the things that actually work, the things that address the addiction at its root rather than just at its surface. The most important of those things is developing alternative sources of the same neurochemical reward. Because your brain does not need approval specifically. It needs dopamine. And dopamine can come from sources that actually serve you, rather than from sources that keep you trapped. It comes from the satisfaction of completing something genuinely challenging, a project, a creative work, a difficult conversation you have been avoiding. That feeling of having done something real, something that required something real from you, is a dopamine experience. It comes from genuine connection, not performed connection, not the managed warmth of someone presenting their best self to another managed self, but the real intimacy of being genuinely known and genuinely knowing another person. That depth of contact is one of the most powerful dopamine experiences available to a human being. It comes from progress, from the clear, felt sense of moving in a direction that is genuinely aligned with what you actually want. Not movement that looks good from outside, movement that feels real from inside. It also comes from helping others in ways that have no audience, from creating things for the sake of creation rather than for the sake of reception, from physical challenge and its aftermath, from learning something that genuinely lights up your curiosity, from moments of awe and beauty and deep engagement with the world. None of these require anyone else's approval. All of them produce real, genuine, neurochemical reward. And the more consistently you nourish these alternative sources, the quieter the pull toward external validation becomes. Not because you have suppressed it by force, but because you have genuinely outgrown its grip, because your brain has found better ways to feel good, ways that serve your growth instead of stunting it, ways that produce genuine satisfaction instead of a temporary high followed by an inevitable crash. The validation addiction is real, but so is the freedom on the other side of it. Chapter 7. The courage to be disliked. Why some people not approving of you is a sign you are doing it right. There is a concept in philosophy developed through the work of Alfred Adler that has the power to completely reframe the way you think about being disliked. The concept is deceptively simple. Being liked by everyone is not a sign of success. It is a sign of erasure. It is evidence that you have made yourself so small, so inoffensive, so thoroughly emptied of anything that might provoke a response, that there is simply nothing left to dislike. Universal approval is not the reward for a life well lived. It is the consolation prize for a life unlived. Let that land for a moment. Because most of us have been operating under the opposite assumption for our entire lives. We have been treating universal likability as the goal, as the signal that we have got it right, that we are doing well, that we are safe. And we have been treating being disliked even by one person, even by someone whose opinion we should not rationally care about as evidence that something has gone wrong, as a problem to be solved, as a failure that needs to be corrected. But think about every person you have ever genuinely admired, not admired superficially, for their looks or their status, but genuinely admired for their honesty, their courage, their way of moving through the world, their ability to do things that mattered. Were any of those people universally liked? Were any of them without critics, without detractors, without people who found their directness difficult or their vision unrealistic or their refusal to conform threatening? Of course not. Every person who has ever stood for something, built something, said something real, chosen a path that was genuinely their own, has been disliked by someone. In many cases, by many people. In some cases, by enormous numbers of people. Because the act of being truly yourself, of expressing a real perspective, of making choices that are genuinely yours, of occupying your full space in the world will always, inevitably, provoke a reaction. And some of those reactions will be negative. This is not something to be managed. It is something to be understood and accepted, because it is simply the truth of how the world works. Not everyone is going to like what you stand for. Not everyone is going to like the way you choose to live. Not everyone is going to approve of your choices, your opinions, your work, your voice, your edges. And that is not a problem with you. It is a feature of being real. It is the natural consequence of being someone rather than something. Objects do not get disliked. People do. And to be dislikable in the sense of having enough genuine substance that someone finds you disagreeable is to confirm that you are actually, genuinely, irreducibly there. The alternative is far worse. The alternative is the life of the people-pleaser who has smoothed away every edge, softened every opinion, qualified every statement, hedged every choice to the point where they offend no one and stand for nothing. And yes, fewer people will dislike them, but far fewer people will truly love them either, because there is simply not enough of them present to love. You cannot have deep connection without real presence. You cannot have genuine intimacy without genuine self-exposure. And you cannot be genuinely self-exposed and also completely inoffensive. Those two things are fundamentally incompatible. Here is something else that is worth sitting with. The people who dislike you most strongly for being genuinely yourself are almost never the people who matter most to your life. Think about the last time someone disapproved of a choice you made that was truly yours. A choice that came from your real values, your real desires, your real sense of what was right for you. Who was it? What was the quality of their insight into your life? How well did they actually know you? How much genuine wisdom did they bring to their assessment? And how much of their disapproval was actually about them, about their own preferences, their own fears, their own way of seeing the world, rather than about any objective truth about you? In most cases, the loudest critics of genuine self-expression are people who have never given themselves permission to express themselves genuinely. People who are deeply invested in the rules and norms that you are breaking, because those rules and norms are the structure that their own self-suppression is organized around. When you live freely, you threaten their cage, not intentionally, not aggressively, simply by demonstrating that the cage is optional, and threatened people criticize. Threatened people judge. Not because their judgment is accurate, but because your freedom confronts their self-imposed limitation in a way that is deeply uncomfortable for them. So the next time someone disapproves of a choice that was genuinely yours, the next time you face criticism for doing something that was actually aligned with your real values, consider the possibility that their disapproval is not information about you. It may be information about them. It may be a reflection of their own unexpressed desires, their own unlived life, their own relationship with the courage you just demonstrated, and they have not yet found in themselves. And consider this: if you are making choices that everyone around you unconditionally approves of, it may be worth asking whether you are actually making your own choices at all. Because real choices that come from a genuine, internally rooted place, are always going to diverge at some point from what at least some of the people around you would prefer. They are going to involve trade-offs that not everyone will understand. They are going to require saying no to things that others would say yes to, and yes to things that others would pass on. They are going to mark you, in some circles, as difficult, in others, as brave. In the circles that matter most, the ones populated by people who are also genuinely trying to live their own real lives, they will mark you as trustworthy, as someone worth knowing, as someone who is actually genuinely there. The courage to be disliked is not the courage to be reckless or unkind or deliberately provocative. It is the quiet, firm, deeply personal courage to remain yourself when the world would prefer a more convenient version of you. It is one of the most important forms of courage there is, and it is available to you right now. In every room you walk into, every conversation you have, every choice you make, from this point forward. Chapter 8. Stop over-explaining yourself. You do not owe anyone a justification for your life. Pay attention to how you communicate your decisions to other people. Not the decisions themselves, the communication around them. Notice how often you frame a choice, not with a simple statement, but with a preemptive defense. How often you justify before anyone has even questioned you. How often you add layer upon layer of explanation, context, and qualification to a decision that is entirely your own, as though the decision itself is not enough, as though you need to build a convincing case for the jury before you are allowed to actually make it. I am not going to the party because I have had a really exhausting week, and I just need some time to recover, and I know I have been a bit absent lately, but it is just that things have been really intense, and I hope you understand, when a simple "I cannot make it" would have been sufficient. I decided to leave my job, and I know it might seem risky, and I know the timing is not perfect, but I have really thought it through, and I have a plan, and I just felt like this was the right move for me, when no explanation was required at all. I am not going to eat that because I am trying to watch what I eat right now. Not that I am on a strict diet or anything. I just feel better when I eat a certain way. I hope that is okay. When you could simply have said no thank you. This pattern, the compulsive over-explanation, the unsolicited justification, the elaborate pre-defense of a personal choice, is one of the most revealing signatures of a life organized around the fear of judgment. Because you only feel compelled To justify what you secretly believe requires justification. You only preempt criticism when you fear criticism is coming. The over-explanation is an anxiety response. It is an attempt to manage the imagined reaction before it can actually materialize. It is saying, "Please do not judge me for this. And here is all the evidence you will need to understand why you should not." And it does this before anyone has even asked. But here is what that pattern actually communicates, not to you, but to the people you are communicating it to. It communicates uncertainty. It communicates that you are not sure your choices are legitimate without external confirmation. It signals that your decisions are, in some sense, up for review, that you are presenting them for approval rather than simply living them. And paradoxically, it often triggers more scrutiny rather than less. Because when you justify extensively, you signal that there is something here that needs justifying. You draw attention to the very thing you were trying to preempt. The defense becomes the invitation to attack. The cleaner, more confident, and frankly more honest communication is the simple statement, "I am not going to the party. I left my job. I am not eating that." Full stop. Not because you owe anyone coldness or rudeness, but because a simple, calm statement of your decision is not cold. It is just true. It is self-respecting. It treats your choice as a given rather than as a proposal. It does not invite a debate it was never looking for. And it costs you almost nothing compared to the energy that the over-explanation requires. Now, there is an important distinction to be made here. There are relationships and contexts in which explanation is genuinely valuable and appropriate, not because you owe it, but because you want to share. Explaining a decision to a close friend or partner because you want them to understand you. Because the explanation deepens the connection, because it is an act of intimacy rather than an act of defense, that is entirely different from over-explaining out of anxiety. The difference is internal. One comes from a genuine desire to connect. The other comes from fear. And you will know which one is operating by how it feels in your body when you are doing it. Genuine sharing feels open. Defensive justification feels tight, urgent, and slightly desperate. The other important distinction is between over-explaining and real accountability. There are situations, professional relationships, genuine partnerships, co-parenting arrangements, where explaining your decisions is part of the structure of the relationship itself. That is not what this chapter is about. This chapter is about the compulsive, anxiety-driven, preemptive justification of personal choices to people who have no legitimate stake in those choices. The explanation you volunteer before anyone has even asked. The defense you build before any charge has been made. And here is the deeper work underneath the behavioral change. The reason the over-explanation happens is not just habit. It is a belief. Somewhere in the programming, there is a message that says, your choices are not safe, without a supporting argument. That what you want and how you choose to live require external authorization to be okay. That without the justification being heard and accepted, the choice itself is not really legitimate. The antidote is not simply stopping the behavior on the outside while the belief continues operating underneath. The antidote is working on the belief itself, practicing in small moments first and then in larger ones. The experience of making a choice, stating it simply, and sitting with the discomfort of not knowing exactly how it landed, of not rushing to fill the silence with more words, of letting the choice stand on its own without a defense. and discovering that the catastrophe you feared does not arrive. That people generally accept simple statements more gracefully than you anticipate. That the world does not require your constant explanation in order to keep turning. Your life does not need a narrator who pre-justifies every scene. It just needs you, living it fully, making choices that come from your real values, and trusting that the life you are building is legitimate because it is yours. You are allowed to simply, quietly, firmly, be without filing a brief. Every time you make a move. Chapter 9. The Comparison Trap: Why You Are Running Someone Else's Race. There is a particular kind of suffering that is unique to the modern era, and it is this: the ability to see, in vivid, curated, constant detail, exactly how everyone else's life appears to be going. Not how it is actually going, how it appears to be going. The highlight reel, the carefully selected, filtered, framed, and captioned presentation of other people's best moments, most flattering angles, greatest achievements, and happiest days served to you in an endless algorithmic stream, specifically calibrated to keep your attention by triggering exactly the emotional response it reliably produces. Envy, inadequacy, the quiet, corrosive sense that everyone else is somehow further along than you are, that other people have figured something out that you have not, that the life you are living, measured against the lives you are seeing, does not quite add up. This is the comparison trap. And it is not a character flaw. It is not a sign that you are weak or shallow or ungrateful. It is a predictable response to a genuinely toxic information environment. But understanding that does not make it any less destructive. It does not exempt you from the work of getting out of it. Because comparison is, at its root, another form of living for other people's reality instead of your own. When you measure your life against someone else's, when you decide how you are doing based on how you stack up against another person's visible achievements, you are not operating from your own values, your own goals, your own definition of a life well lived. You are borrowing someone else's measuring stick and using it to evaluate a life it was never designed to measure. The person you are comparing yourself to has a different history, different circumstances, different gifts, different challenges, different desires, and a fundamentally different definition of what it means to succeed and to be happy. Even if your lives look outwardly similar, the comparison is still entirely false, because the interior landscapes are completely different. What looks like success in their life may be the very thing that would make you deeply miserable. What feels like failure in your own life may be the most necessary and important season of growth you will ever go through. You cannot see any of that from the outside, and they cannot see any of yours. Here is something worth sitting with about the lives you most frequently compare yours to. The people living those lives are often performing them for the exact same reason you perform yours. Because they are afraid that without the performance, they will not measure up. The perfectly composed photograph is often taken on the worst day of the week. The confident, accomplished exterior is often held together with enormous effort that no one gets to witness. The relationship that looks like the ideal from outside may be the very relationship that is quietly falling apart on the inside. The career that looks like winning from every angle may feel, from within, like the most suffocating trap imaginable. This is not cynicism. This is not a suggestion that other people's happiness is fabricated. Some of it is deeply, genuinely real. But even the genuinely happy, genuinely successful people you compare yourself to are not living the version of their life that you see. They are living the full, complicated, difficult, uncertain, private, real version. The same kind of version you are living and choosing to show you the curated one. The comparison you are making is between your full, unfiltered interior experience and someone else's most flattering exterior presentation. It is not a fair fight. It was never designed to be. And every time you measure yourself against it, you lose by default. Because the game was rigged before you even started playing. The deeper problem with comparison is that it pulls your attention completely out of your own life and into a distorted mirror of someone else's. And attention is the raw material of experience. Where your attention goes, your experience follows. When the majority of your mental energy is occupied with measuring yourself against others, there is almost nothing left for actually inhabiting your own life, for developing your own gifts, moving in your own direction, building things that genuinely matter to you, experiencing the specific, unrepeatable texture of your own days. You are running a race on someone else's track toward a finish line that someone else drew at a speed determined by someone else's pace. And you are exhausted and disoriented and never quite getting there, because the track was never yours to begin with. The way out of the comparison trap is not simply to consume less, though reducing your exposure to curated highlight reels often helps considerably. The real way out is to develop a much clearer, stronger, and more vivid relationship with your own definition of what you actually want. Because comparison only has power over you when you do not have a clear enough picture of your own direction to stay anchored to it. When you know exactly where you are going and exactly why, and when that destination is genuinely yours, rooted in your real values, rather than borrowed from the surrounding culture, other people's trajectories become far less relevant. They are going somewhere. You are going somewhere. The directions are simply different. And there is no reason for one to undermine the other. This requires the uncomfortable and deeply personal work of asking yourself what you would want for your life if you had never seen anyone else's. If you had grown up without cultural messaging about what success looks like, without the constant stream of other people's highlight reels, without family expectations shaping your picture of what a good life is supposed to resemble, what would you actually want? What kind of work would feel genuinely meaningful? What kind of days would feel genuinely full? What kind of relationships? What kind of environment? What kind of pace and rhythm and purpose would constitute, for you specifically, a life that felt worth living? Those answers, however different they are from the lives you have been comparing yours to, are the direction you should be running in. Not faster than someone else, not toward a destination someone else selected, but toward something that is genuinely, irreducibly, specifically yours. The moment you start running your own race, the comparison stops being interesting. Other people's achievements stop feeling like indictments of your progress, because their finish line is not your finish line. Their pace is not your pace. Their path was never going where you are going. You can genuinely wish them well, feel glad for their success, and then return your full, undivided attention to where it belongs, to the specific, unrepeatable life you are building, on your own terms, toward your own horizon. Chapter 10. Social Masks and the cost of performing, how to finally show up as your actual self. Most people wear different masks in different parts of their life. The version of you that shows up at work is not quite the same as the version that shows up with close friends. The version of you at family gatherings is not the same as the version at a dinner with your own carefully chosen people. The version of you with a new romantic partner in the early weeks is different from the version that eventually emerges when safety has been established. To some extent, this is normal. Human beings are contextual creatures. We modulate our communication and behavior based on social context, and that is not inherently dishonest or wrong. Adjusting your tone for a professional setting is not the same as lying about who you are, but there is a version of this that goes much further than normal social modulation. And that is the version this chapter is about. It is the version where the mask is not just a minor adjustment, but a comprehensive performance, where the gap between who you are in public and who you are in private is so wide that crossing it produces a kind of vertigo, where you spend so much energy managing how you are perceived that very little energy is left to actually be present, where the performance has gone on so long and been so thorough that you have, somewhere along the way, genuinely lost reliable access to the thing behind it. This is what full-time social performance does to a person over years. It does not just cost energy and authenticity in the moment. It produces, over time, a specific kind of psychological fracture. The interior and the exterior of your life become disconnected from each other. The you that other people experience and the you that lives inside your own head begin to feel like two separate entities with no reliable bridge between them. And the result of that fracture is a specific, chronic, hard-to-name form of misery, not dramatic suffering, just the persistent, low-grade sense that something is profoundly off, that your life does not quite fit, that the relationships you are in, no matter how warm they appear on the surface, do not quite touch the real thing, that the successes you achieve feel hollow in a way you cannot explain without sounding ungrateful, that you are always, just slightly to the left of where you actually are, present, but not quite there, connected, but not quite met. Psychologists call the state of alignment between interior experience and outward expression congruence. And research on human well-being consistently shows that congruence, the felt sense that who you are inside is genuinely reflected in how you live and present yourself outside, is one of the most reliable predictors of deep psychological health. Not wealth, not status, not the number of people who approve of you. Congruence, the simple, quietly radical experience of your inside and your outside matching each other. So the question becomes, how do you get there? How do you begin the process of dropping the mask? Not all at once, not in every context simultaneously, but in a genuine, sustainable, incrementally courageous way that does not blow up your life in the process. It starts with noticing. Before you can change the performance, you need to see it clearly. You need to begin paying attention with real curiosity and without judgment to the moments when you are performing rather than being, to the way your body feels when you say something that does not quite match what you actually think, to the subtle shift in your energy when you walk into certain rooms and automatically slip into a mode that is not quite you, to the specific relief, and you know this feeling, even if you have never named it, that comes when you are finally alone or finally with someone completely safe and you can let it drop. That relief is important information. It is telling you with great precision exactly how much energy the performance is requiring and exactly how much it is costing. Also notice the situations that bring out your most authentic self. The people with whom the gap between interior and exterior is smallest. The environments where you feel least monitored, least evaluated, least concerned with how you are coming across. Pay attention to how you feel in those moments, compared to the moments when you are in full performance mode. That difference, the felt, bodily difference between genuine presence and managed presentation, is the compass you will use as you begin the work of closing the gap between the two. Then begin practicing small acts of authentic expression in progressively less protected environments. Start where it is easiest. With the person or people who already know you best, practice being slightly more honest than usual. Share an opinion you would normally qualify into softness. Express a feeling you would normally manage before it reaches the surface. Disagree with something you would normally let pass, unchallenged, not dramatically, not as a confrontation or a declaration, just a little more honestly than before. And notice what happens. In most cases, the relationship does not shatter. In most cases, honesty delivered with genuine care brings people closer rather than pushing them away. In most cases, showing a little more of what is actually there deepens the connection rather than threatening it. Then do it again somewhere slightly less comfortable, with someone you know a little less well, or in a context that feels a little more exposed. And again, notice what happens. You are building evidence, not through reassurance, not through being told it will be okay, but through direct experience that being yourself is not as catastrophically dangerous as the old programming has been insisting all these years. The mask does not come off all at once, and it should not. This is not a call to sudden, total, completely unguarded transparency in every context of your life. The goal is a gradual, consistent, courageous narrowing of the gap between who you are and who you present yourself as being. The goal is a life where the performance takes up less and less of the stage, and the actual person takes up more and more of it, where the energy that went into maintenance gets redirected into living, where the relationships in your life are built on genuine contact, real person to real person, rather than on the careful meeting of two highly managed presentations. There is a quality that human beings recognize instinctively in another person and respond to with enormous warmth and with trust. It is the quality of someone who is genuinely, uncomplicatedly present. Someone who is not running a constant calculation from behind a layer of image management. Someone in whom the interior and the exterior are close enough together that you feel, when you are with them, like you are actually meeting someone real. We call it authenticity. We call it genuineness. We call it being real. And we find it magnetic because it is rare, and because somewhere in us we recognize it as the thing we have all been hungry for. Not the performance, but the person. Not the carefully constructed image, but the actual, imperfect, completely irreplaceable human face behind it. You have that face. It has been underneath the mask the entire time, completely intact, waiting. And the world, the part of it worth connecting with, the part that will actually nourish you, the part that will love you in the ways that matter, is waiting to finally see it. And here is the final truth about authenticity that everything in this chapter builds toward. It is not a destination you arrive at once and then maintain effortlessly. It is a practice, a daily, ongoing, sometimes uncomfortable practice of choosing yourself over the performance, of noticing when you have slipped back into the mask and gently, without judgment, taking it off again, of returning again and again to the question of what is actually true for you right now, not what is expected, not what is convenient, not what the room seems to want, but what is genuinely, honestly, actually true. Some days that practice will feel easy. Some days it will feel terrifying. Some days the gap between who you are and who you have been presenting yourself as will seem small and manageable, and you will move through the world with a lightness you cannot quite explain. Other days, old patterns will surface with surprising force. A familiar environment or a certain kind of social pressure will trigger the old reflexes, and you will find yourself halfway through a performance before you even realized you started one. That is not failure. That is how deeply embedded these patterns are, and how much patience and compassion the work of unraveling them requires. What matters is not perfection. What matters is direction. Are you moving, however slowly, toward greater alignment between who you are and how you live? Are you making choices, even small ones, from a more authentic place than you were a year ago? Are there more people in your life who know the real version of you, and fewer to whom you are presenting only the managed one? Are the relationships you are building getting deeper, more real, more genuinely nourishing over time? If the answer to those questions is yes, even a qualified, partial, still in progress yes, then you are doing the work. And the work, done consistently over time, will change your life in ways that no amount of approval-seeking ever could. Because when you stop performing and start living, something extraordinary happens to the quality of everything. Your relationships become richer because the people in them are actually meeting you. Your achievements become more satisfying because they come from your real values rather than from the need to be seen in a certain way. Your daily experience of being alive becomes more vivid, more textured, more genuinely yours, not because the circumstances of your life have dramatically changed, but because you are finally, actually, present in it. The performance had you living life from a slight remove, always watching yourself from outside, always monitoring the reaction, always managing the impression. Presence puts you back in the center of your own experience, where you were always meant to be. And that return, that simple, radical, hard-won return to yourself, is the beginning of everything this audiobook is ultimately about. There is also a relational dimension to authenticity that deserves to be named directly, because it is one of the most powerful motivators for doing this work. When you show up as your real self, you do not just benefit yourself. You give other people permission to do the same. Authenticity is contagious in the most beautiful way. When someone in a room drops their mask, even slightly when they say something genuinely honest, take a position that is genuinely theirs, admit to something that they would normally carefully hide, the room shifts. The ambient performance level drops. Other people feel, even if they cannot articulate it, that something real just happened, and they lean toward it. Because realness is what every human being is hungry for, all the time, underneath all the performance. This means that your commitment to authenticity is not just a personal act, it is a social one. Every time you choose honesty over performance, you create a small opening in the social fabric that other people can walk through. Every time you say something real, in a context where the expected thing was something managed, you make it slightly easier for the people around you to do the same. You become, without trying or performing or announcing it, someone safe to be real around. And that quality of being genuinely safe to be real around, is one of the rarest and most valuable things one human being can offer another. The people who have had the deepest impact on your life are almost certainly not the ones who were the most impressive or the most polished or the most universally approved of. They are the ones who were most genuinely themselves. The ones from whom the performance was absent or close to absent, and in whose presence you felt maybe for the first time in a long time that you did not have to perform either, that you could just be there, that your realness was welcome. That is the kind of presence you can become for others. Not by trying harder, not by being more impressive, but by being more genuinely, courageously, consistently yourself. That is the gift at the end of this particular road, and it belongs to you whenever you are ready to claim it. Chapter 11. The people who keep you small. How to identify and navigate relationships that depend on your smallness. Not everyone in your life wants you to grow. This is one of the most difficult truths to accept, especially when the people who prefer you small are people you love, people who have been in your life for a long time, who care about you in their own way, who would be genuinely hurt if you told them what you are about to read. But accepting it is essential, because one of the most powerful and invisible forces keeping you trapped in the approval cycle is not your own fear alone. It is the people around you who have, consciously or not, built their relationship with you around the version of you that needs their approval, the version of you that is manageable, predictable, safe, small. These relationships take many forms. Sometimes it is a parent whose love has always come packaged with expectation, who supports you warmly when you make choices they approve of, and withdraws, subtly or dramatically, when you do not. The love is real. The expectation is also real. And the message that comes through, even without words, is that the full version of you, the version with its own direction, its own values, its own unapologetic choices, is more than this relationship was designed to hold. Sometimes it is a long-term friendship that was formed when both of you were younger, more lost, more defined by the things you had not yet figured out. And as you have grown, as you have done the work of becoming more genuinely yourself, you have noticed a certain friction, a subtle resistance when you talk about your real aspirations. A joke that lands a little too close to diminishment. A dynamic in which your growth is met not with celebration but with something that looks uncomfortably like discomfort. Because your growth is a mirror, and mirrors, for people who are not yet ready to look at themselves, are threatening. Sometimes it is a romantic partner who fell in love with the version of you that needed them in a particular way, needed their reassurance, their guidance, their approval, their strength filling the space that your own self-doubt had created. And as that self-doubt heals, as you become less dependent on external validation and more rooted in your own identity, the dynamic shifts in ways that can be destabilizing for both of you. And sometimes it is simply the social group, the circle, the community, the environment whose norms and expectations have, over time, become a container that no longer fits the person you are becoming. Not because the people in it are bad, but because the version of you that belongs in that container is not quite you anymore. Recognizing these dynamics is not about blame. The people who keep you small are not, in most cases, doing it deliberately. They are doing it because they are human beings with their own fears and their own unresolved needs. And because the version of you that was seeking approval was, in some ways, easier for them, more comfortable, less challenging, more available to meet their needs, because it was not yet fully occupied with meeting your own. But recognition without action is just awareness of a trap. You are still inside. So what do you do with it? The first thing you do is get honest with yourself, not necessarily with them, about what is actually happening in these relationships. Not in a harsh, accusatory way, but in a clear-eyed way. You stop telling yourself the comfortable story that everything is fine and this is all just in your head. You let yourself see, without flinching, where the dynamic is costing you, where you are making yourself smaller to keep the peace, where you are silencing your real thoughts, hiding your real choices, suppressing your real direction, because you know that expressing them fully would create a reaction you do not want to deal with. Then you make a choice about what to do with what you see. And here is where it matters to be careful, because the answer is not always the same. Some relationships, the ones built on enough genuine care and enough genuine flexibility, can expand to hold the larger version of you, if you give them the chance. If you bring your real self into them more consistently, more courageously, over time, and give the other person the opportunity to meet you there. Some people who have been relating to your smaller self will surprise you. When they see that you are more solid, more grounded, more genuinely yourself, they will find that they prefer it, that the authenticity they were not expecting is actually something they welcome. These relationships do not need to end. They need to evolve. And evolution in a relationship requires that both people be willing to let go of the version of the dynamic that no longer serves either of them. Other relationships will not survive the evolution, not because you end them dramatically, but because, as you become more yourself and less available to be managed, the thing that held the relationship together begins to dissolve. The mutual need that was its foundation shifts, and you find that the connection outside of that shared dynamic was thinner than you realized. That without the approval seeking and the managing, there is less there than you thought. These relationships do not need a dramatic exit. They need a gentle, honest, gradually increasing investment of your actual self and the truth of whether they can hold that will become clear on its own. What you cannot do, or rather, what you should no longer do, is continue to shrink yourself indefinitely to maintain relationships that cannot hold your full size. Because every day you spend making yourself smaller for someone else's comfort is a day you are not fully living. And you have already spent enough of those days. The goal now is to find, build, and invest in relationships where your full self is not a problem to be managed, but a presence to be welcomed. Those relationships exist. They are waiting for you. But you will only find them when you stop hiding the thing they are looking for. Chapter 12. Boundaries without guilt. How to protect your energy. And finally, stop saying yes when you mean no. The word boundary has been used so frequently in recent years that it has started to lose its weight. It has become a buzzword, a piece of therapeutic vocabulary that people deploy in conversation without always being clear on what it actually means in practice. So before we go any further, let us be precise about what a boundary actually is, because precision here matters enormously. A boundary is not a wall. It is not a punishment. It is not a weapon you use to control other people's behavior. A boundary is, at its most fundamental level, a definition. It is a clear, honest statement of what you will and will not engage with, what you will and will not accept, what you are and are not available for. It is how you communicate to yourself first, and then to the world, the terms under which you are willing to participate in a relationship, a situation, an environment. It is, in the deepest sense, a form of self-knowledge made external. Most people who struggle with people-pleasing do not lack the ability to set boundaries in any technical sense. They know what they want and do not want. They know what drains them and what nourishes them. They know when they are being asked for more than they have to give. The problem is not information. The problem is the guilt. The immediate, powerful, physically felt guilt that surges up the moment they even consider declining something, disappointing someone, or prioritizing their own needs over someone else's comfort. That guilt is not a moral signal. This is critical to understand. It feels like a moral signal. It feels like you are doing something wrong, like you are being selfish, like you are failing in some important duty. But it is not. It is a conditioned response. It is the emotional residue of years of learning that your worth is tied to your usefulness to others. That being a good person means being an endlessly available person. That saying no is a form of abandonment. That your needs come last, always, because prioritizing them feels indistinguishable from selfishness. None of that is true. But the feeling is real, and it is powerful, and it is what keeps the boundary from being stated even when it is clearly needed. So the work of setting boundaries is not primarily behavioral. It is not about learning a script or a technique for saying no gracefully, though those things can be useful. It is primarily internal. It is the work of disentangling your worth from your output, of separating the experience of guilt from the assessment of wrongdoing, of learning slowly, through practice and repetition, that a boundary is not a moral failure. It is an act of self-respect. Let us talk about what saying yes when you mean no actually costs. Because I think most people, when they imagine setting a boundary, focus almost entirely on the cost of saying no, on the discomfort it might create, the disappointment it might produce, the conflict it might trigger. And those costs are real. They feel significant. But what gets almost no attention is the cost of saying yes when you mean no, which is both more serious and more cumulative. Every yes that comes from fear rather than genuine willingness carries a hidden charge. It draws on a resource, your energy, your time, your emotional availability, your sense of integrity, and depletes it without return. And because it was not freely given, because it came from obligation rather than genuine desire, it tends to produce resentment, the quiet, compounding, difficult to articulate resentment that builds in a person who has been giving what they did not have to give for a very long time. That resentment is not the sign of a bad or ungrateful person. It is a natural physiological response to chronic resource depletion. It is your nervous system telling you that the budget has been exhausted and something needs to change. The other cost of the chronic yes is what it does to your relationships. It seems counterintuitive, but consistently saying yes when you mean no does not produce closeness. It produces a specific kind of distance. Because when you are always agreeable, always available, always giving more than you genuinely have to give, the other person is not relating to you. They are relating to your performance of availability. And somewhere in them below conscious articulation, they often sense this. They sense that the yes is not quite real, that the warmth is managed, that there is a level at which they are not actually meeting you, because the real you, the one with its own limits and needs and preferences, has been carefully hidden behind the performance of endless agreeableness. The counterintuitive truth is that honest limits make relationships more real, not less. A genuine no delivered clearly, without cruelty, without excessive justification, communicates more respect for the relationship than a false yes ever can. It says, "I am giving you my honest response," rather than managing your feelings. It says, "I trust this relationship enough to tell you the truth about what I have to give." It treats the other person as capable of handling reality rather than as someone who requires careful management. And most of the time, though not always, people handle it better than you feared they would. So practice. Start small. Start with the low-stakes situations where the cost of a genuine no is manageable and the benefit of honesty is clear. Say no to the invitation you do not want to attend. Decline the favor you do not have bandwidth for. Set the limit with the person whose demands have been quietly exceeding what you genuinely have to offer. Do it simply and directly, without over-explaining, without apologizing for your own existence. And sit with the guilt when it comes, because it will come without immediately acting to relieve it by reversing your decision. Let it be there. Notice that it is a feeling, not a verdict. Notice that you have not actually done anything wrong. Notice that the catastrophe you are bracing for is, in most cases, considerably smaller than you expected. Every time you do this, the guilt response weakens slightly. Every time you set an honest limit and the world does not end, your nervous system learns something new. It learns that your needs are legitimate, that your limits are survivable for you and for the people around you, that you are allowed to take up the space your life actually requires, that being a good person and being an endlessly available person are not the same thing, and that the relationships worth keeping are the ones that can hold your honesty, including the honesty of the limit. Chapter 13. Living boldly, how to make decisions from courage instead of fear. Think about the last significant decision you made. Not the trivial daily choices, what to eat, what to wear, which route to take. A real decision. Something that mattered. Something that had real stakes. And ask yourself, with complete honesty, what drove that decision? What was the primary force that shaped the outcome you chose? Was it what you genuinely wanted? Was it what aligned with your real values? Or was it, at least in part, what you thought would look right, sound right, be approved of by the people whose opinions you have been organizing your life around? For most people living under the influence of the approval trap, the honest answer to that question is uncomfortable. Because most of the major decisions of an approval-driven life are not made from genuine desire or authentic values. They are made from fear. Fear of what people will think. Fear of what happens if it goes wrong, and people see it go wrong. Fear of the criticism that might come if the unconventional choice does not pay off. Fear of being left alone on the edge of a decision that nobody else validated. Fear-driven decisions have a specific quality that is worth learning to recognize, because you will feel it every time you are about to make one. It feels like caution. It feels like reasonableness. It feels like prudence and good judgment and not getting ahead of yourself. But underneath that feeling of prudence, there is something else, something quieter and less comfortable that, if you are honest, you can usually identify. A shrinking. A sense of choosing the smaller option, not because it is genuinely better, but because it is safer in the social sense. Because it is harder to be criticized for. Because it fits more neatly into what other people expect. Courage-driven decisions feel different. They feel alive in a way that fear-driven decisions rarely do. They feel like the thing you actually want to do, not the thing that seems safest to want, not the thing that will be easiest to explain, but the thing that, when you are completely honest with yourself, in a quiet moment, you can feel pulling you. They carry a quality of rightness that has nothing to do with how they look from outside. They feel like your actual life rather than a performance of one. Now, living boldly does not mean living recklessly. This is an important distinction, because people often collapse boldness with recklessness in a way that gives them an excuse to stay safe. Bold decisions are not necessarily dramatic or impulsive. Bold decisions can be quiet. They can be incremental. They can be the decision to stay in a situation when leaving would be easier, or the decision to leave a situation when everyone around you expects you to stay. What makes them bold is not the scale but the source. They come from your genuine values and your genuine desires, rather than from the fear of what people will think if you choose differently. The path from fear-driven decisions to courage-driven ones is not taken in one leap. It is taken in a series of increasingly honest choices, beginning in the places where the stakes are low enough to make honesty manageable and the feedback immediate enough to be instructive. You start by making one small decision genuinely yours, genuinely honest, and noticing what happens. You start by choosing the thing that is actually right for you in a situation where the cost of being wrong is survivable. And you pay attention. You notice how it feels to make that choice, compared to how it feels to make the managed one. You notice that the anxiety that preceded the bold choice was largely not borne out by what actually happened afterward. You notice that the feared judgment mostly did not materialize, and that the approval you sacrificed was not worth what you had been paying for it. And then you do it again, in a slightly higher stakes situation, and again. And gradually, not overnight, not without setbacks, not in a straight line, the default begins to shift. The first question you ask yourself when facing a decision starts to change. It used to be, what will people think of this? It starts to become, what do I actually think of this? It used to be, what choice will be easiest to defend? It starts to become, what choice is genuinely right for me? Not because you have become indifferent to the world around you, but because you have developed enough of your own internal reference point to navigate by it, rather than by the constantly shifting compass of other people's preferences. There is a quality to a life built from a series of courage-driven decisions that is unmistakable. It has a coherence to it, a through line. The chapters of the life connect to each other in a way that makes sense, not because they were externally imposed, but because they were internally generated. The decisions, taken together, look like the life of someone who knew what they wanted and moved toward it, who made mistakes, certainly, who faced failure, absolutely, who disappointed people, inevitably, but who was, throughout all of it, genuinely and consistently themselves. That is what a life built from courage looks like. Not a perfect life, not an easy life, not a life that everyone approved of at every turn, but a real one. A life that, when you look back at it, you recognize as yours, not a performance for an audience that was barely watching, but an actual, genuine, fully inhabited human life. That is what is on the other side of the fear. That is what becomes possible the moment you start choosing from courage instead. Chapter 14. Rebuilding from the inside. The daily practice of choosing yourself. Everything in this audiobook up to this point has been pointing towards something that is both simpler and more demanding than any specific technique or strategy. It has been pointing toward a fundamental reorientation of how you live, a shift in the center of gravity of your daily experience from the outside to the inside, from what other people think to what you actually know and feel and value, from the management of perception to the practice of genuine self-expression. And that reorientation, as necessary and as liberating as it is, does not happen once. It happens every day, in dozens of small moments that most people never even notice. This is the daily practice of choosing yourself, and it is a practice in the truest sense, not something you master and then maintain effortlessly, but something you return to, again and again, in the ordinary texture of your days. It happens in the moment when someone asks your opinion, and you feel the familiar pull to give the answer that will be most welcome. And instead you pause, check in with what you actually think, and say that, not harshly, not provocatively, but honestly. It happens when you are deciding how to spend an evening, and the socially expected answer is different from what you genuinely need. And you choose the genuine need. Not every time life requires compromise and care for others, but enough times that it stops feeling like rebellion and starts feeling like routine. It happens when you receive criticism and feel the old, familiar collapse, the immediate assumption that the critic must be right, that the judgment must be accurate, that you must adjust yourself accordingly, and instead you pause. You ask, with genuine honesty, whether there is something useful here, whether the feedback is coming from a credible place, whether it reflects a real gap between your intentions and your impact, and if it does, you take it seriously. And if it does not, if it is simply the expression of someone else's preference, someone else's discomfort with who you are, you let it pass without reorganizing yourself around it. It happens when you are about to apologize for something that does not actually require an apology, for taking up space, for having a need, for making a decision that is genuinely yours, and you catch the reflex and release it. You are allowed to exist without apologizing for it. It happens when you feel the urge to minimize your own achievements in conversation, to deflect, to qualify, to attribute your success to luck or to others, to make sure you do not seem like you are taking yourself too seriously, and instead you simply receive acknowledgement gracefully. You say thank you, you let it land. You do not perform humility as a way of managing the perception that you might think too well of yourself. It happens when someone asks you to do something and your body knows, immediately and clearly, that the answer is no. And instead of overriding that knowing with reasoning about what you should be willing to do, you trust it. You say no. You let the no be. enough. These are small moments. Individually, none of them feels transformative, but the accumulation of them over days and weeks and months is the substance of the transformation. Because identity is not built in dramatic single moments of courage and clarity. It is built in the aggregate of thousands of ordinary moments in which you either choose yourself or you do not, in which you either honor what is true for you or you override it in service of someone else's comfort or expectation. And the direction of those thousands of choices, taken together over time, determines the life you end up living. There is a practice within this practice that deserves specific attention, and it is the practice of daily self-inquiry, of setting aside even a small amount of time. It does not need to be long. It does not need to be elaborate, to genuinely check in with yourself, to ask, without the usual filtering and managing and performing, what is actually true for you right now? What do you feel? What do you want? What do you need? What is working in your life? And what is quietly not? What have you been telling yourself is fine when it is not quite fine? What have you been putting off because engaging with it honestly would require a kind of courage you have not yet mustered? These are not comfortable questions, but they are the questions of a life genuinely lived from the inside rather than performed for the outside. And the answers you find in them, even when they are complicated, even when they reveal things you would rather not see, are the raw material of genuine change, of genuine growth, of the kind of life that, when you are in it, feels unmistakably real. The daily practice of choosing yourself is not a performance. It is not a way of announcing to the world that you have transcended the need for approval. It is a quiet, personal, deeply private commitment to the ongoing project of being who you actually are. It will not always look impressive. It will not always feel heroic. Much of the time, it will feel ordinary, just the small, consistent work of living honestly in a world that will always offer you easier, more comfortable, more socially rewarded alternatives. But at the end of the days and the weeks and the years in which you do that work, you will have something that no amount of approval seeking could ever give you. You will have a life that is genuinely yours, and you will know it in the way you can only know things that come from the inside, not because someone told you it was good, not because it looked right from outside, but because, when you look at it, you recognize it, because it fits, because it is. In the deepest sense you know how to feel, actually you. Chapter 15. The other side, what your life becomes when you finally stop living for other people's opinions. We have traveled a long way together through this audiobook. We have looked honestly at the invisible prison of approval seeking, at the childhood roots of the fear of judgment, at the neurological and psychological mechanisms that keep the pattern in place. We have examined what people-pleasing costs you, how comparison keeps you small, how social masks create the fracture between your interior and exterior life, how validation, addiction, works against your freedom, why the courage to be disliked is one of the most important forms of courage you can develop, and how the daily practice of choosing yourself is the path out of all of it. Now I want to tell you something about where that path goes. Not as an abstract promise, not as motivational shorthand, but as a real, honest description of what actually changes when you do this work consistently and see it through. The first thing that changes is the quality of your attention. Right now, a significant portion of your mental bandwidth, more than you realize, is occupied with monitoring, with tracking how you are coming across, predicting how people are receiving you, managing the impression you are making, reviewing the recent past, for moments where you might have said or done something that could have been judged negatively. When that monitoring begins to quiet down, and it does quiet down, not all at once but progressively, as the internal foundation becomes more solid, you get that bandwidth back. And what you do with it is remarkable. You become more present, more genuinely engaged with whatever is actually in front of you, more alive to your own experience as it is happening rather than as it will look in the retrospective judgment of others. The world becomes more vivid. Your own life becomes more immediate and more real. The second thing that changes is the quality of your relationships. And this is perhaps the most beautiful change of all. When you stop performing for the people in your life and start being genuinely present with them, something shifts in the quality of the connection. They may not be able to articulate it, but they feel it. They feel that they are actually meeting someone now, not the managed presentation of someone, but the person themselves. And when the person they are meeting is genuinely there, they can be genuinely there too. The interactions become warmer. The conversations go deeper. The silences are more comfortable. The understanding is more real. You begin to attract and to invest your energy in the relationships that can hold the full version of you, the ones that do not require you to perform or manage or edit yourself into a shape that fits someone else's preference. And the loneliness that had been living underneath all the socializing, all the performance, all the carefully managed connection begins to lift, because you are finally genuinely known. The third thing that changes is your relationship with failure and criticism. One of the most disabling features of the approval-dependent life is how catastrophically it handles things going wrong. Because when your sense of self-worth is externally referenced, failure does not just feel like a setback. It feels like a verdict. It feels like confirmation of the worst things you secretly believe about yourself. A single critical comment can undo months of positive input. A single visible mistake can send you spiraling. And so the fear of failure becomes enormous enough to stop you from attempting the things that most matter to you, because the potential cost of being seen to fail is simply too high. When your self-worth is genuinely internally referenced, failure changes shape. It does not stop hurting. It does not stop being disappointing or frustrating or costly, but it stops being existential. It stops touching the core of your identity, because your identity is no longer located in your track record of external successes and failures. It is located in your values, your commitment to being genuine, your willingness to keep trying. You can fail publicly and remain standing, because the part of you that is standing has nothing to do with the failure. You can receive criticism and consider it without collapsing into it, because your self-concept is not dependent on the critic's approval for its coherence. This changes what you are willing to risk, and what you are willing to risk determines the size of the life you are capable of living. The fourth thing that changes is your sense of time. There is a strange timelessness to the approval-driven life, a feeling of being perpetually in the waiting room of your own existence, always preparing for the moment when things will finally be right, when you will finally have enough approval, enough validation, enough external confirmation that you are okay to actually begin living the way you want to live. When you stop waiting for that permission, time opens up in a new way. The present moment becomes less of a performance to get through and more of an experience to inhabit. The future becomes something you move toward actively and with genuine intention, rather than something you wait to be permitted to enter. The sense of your life as something you are authoring, rather than something you are auditioning for, is one of the most profound shifts that comes from this work. The fifth thing that changes, and perhaps the most quietly revolutionary, is the nature of your inner life. The voice inside your head, the one that has been running a constant commentary on how you are doing, how you are coming across, whether you are enough, whether you are too much, whether you are okay. That voice begins to change its tone. It does not go silent. But as you do the work of building a genuine, internally rooted sense of who you are, the voice becomes less like an anxious critic and more like a trusted companion, less like a monitoring system and more like a genuine conscience, one that guides you toward your real values rather than toward social safety. That shift in the quality of your own internal experience is worth more than any external approval you have ever received or ever will. None of this happens completely or permanently or without setback. You will have days when the old patterns resurface with surprising force. Days when someone's disapproval lands harder than you expected. Days when the comparison trap catches you before you see it coming. Days when the mask goes back on without you quite deciding to put it there. That is not failure. That is the nature of deep change. It moves in spirals, not straight lines. And the old territory sometimes looks like new territory until you recognize the familiar contours. What matters is not that you never return to the old patterns. What matters is that you no longer live there, that the center of gravity of your life has genuinely shifted from outside to inside, from performed to lived, from approval-seeking to self-directed, that the moments of genuine freedom are becoming more frequent, the moments of inauthenticity less comfortable and harder to sustain. You began this audiobook asking, perhaps, whether it was really possible to stop caring what people think. The honest answer is that you will probably always care, to some degree. You are a human being. Connection matters to you. The opinions of people you love have weight. That is not a weakness. That is what it means to be someone who is genuinely in the world with other people. But there is a world of difference between caring about the opinions of the people who genuinely know and love you, caring about them in a way that informs your choices without controlling them, and living the entirety of your life in service of a generalized, ambient, largely imaginary audience whose approval you were never going to be able to capture anyway. The first is love. The second is the prison, and you have the key. You have always had the key. It has been in your hand this entire time, waiting for the moment you decided you were ready to use it. That moment is now. Your life, the real one. Not the performance, not the carefully managed impression, not the version designed for maximum approval, is waiting for you on the other side of this decision. It has always been waiting. And every single day you choose yourself over the crowd. Every single time you say what is true rather than what is safe. Every single moment you inhabit your own experience. Instead of monitoring it from outside, you are walking toward it. Keep walking. There is one final thing that deserves to be said, and it is this. The work you have done by listening to this audiobook, the willingness to look honestly at the patterns, to sit with the uncomfortable truths, to consider the possibility that a different way of living is available to you, that itself is an act of courage. Most people will never do it. Most people will continue performing, continue shrinking, Continue waiting for permission to live the life that has been theirs all along. Not because they are weak, but because no one ever showed them clearly enough that the prison door was open. You have seen it now. You cannot unsee it. And the version of you that walks out of this audiobook is not the same as the one who walked in. Not because you have been given anything from outside, but because you have been reminded of something that was always inside. Something that the noise of other people's opinions had temporarily drowned out, but never actually destroyed. Your own voice, your own knowing, your own irreplaceable sense of who you are and what your life is meant to be. That voice is speaking right now. Underneath the habit and the fear and the long conditioning towards smallness, it is speaking. It has been speaking the entire time. And it has been waiting patiently, persistently, with a loyalty to you that nothing in the external world could ever match for you to finally, fully, stop drowning it out. Listen to it. Live it. It is the only life you were ever actually meant to live.